My name is Evan Hayes, and I am currently a full-time pastor, campus pastor with Rimrock downtown. I guess Rimrock is a church as a whole, but for the downtown campus. It's fairly new for me to be full-time. That was just as of July 1st. Our church has grown into the spot where they needed me to move full-time. Prior to that, it was more bivocational. My wife and I also own 11 cabins up by Mount Rushmore. That's kind of what we've been doing for 12 years or so, making our money through that means, but also having a real passion for God and specifically teaching the word to people. And Rimrock, specifically Rimrock downtown, has been a venue through which I can do that. I'm married to my wife, Rosalind, 19 years now. I've got 2 kids, 11-year-old son, Gibson, and my daughter, Eden, is 9.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing. The cabin thing, that was from your parents?
Yeah, my in-laws.
Your in-laws, that's right. Okay. But being outdoors in camping, that's like a passion of yours.
Very much so, yeah. I've spent endless days, months, years outside. That's where I very much come alive.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot. Like the importance of being outside, the importance of, being in God's creation as opposed to, I think it's something we talked about last time we got coffee. Like, I think we're just so easily distracted by the world that we've created and it's not necessarily inherently evil, but we forget about the importance of the nature and the world that God's created. And that's something that you're really passionate about. I feel like you probably talk about it every time you preach, which I think is a good thing,
Yeah, the like what Paul says in Romans 1, I think it's verse 20, that like it's beyond excuse when you look at the natural world that God does exist.
Yeah.
And so that's a big reason why I continually go back to with my sermons. I'm very logic based, and that seems to be such a key piece of evidence for me of the reality of God and seeing the importance of pointing people to, like I said, what Paul says is undeniable.
Yeah. That part of Paul's message, I think, is just something that I know. Just before we were recording, I was talking about how I focus on the theology side of things, which I guess that's theology, but recognizing that there is just a world that we can look around at and realize this definitely didn't just happen by chance. I don't get that personally. I don't get that the view that says this just happened, And I think even we've also talked about in the past, whether or not the evolution thing is accurate, whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, if God created it, who really cares? I mean, it's interesting to know, but it is interesting that we have a lot of people who are purely science-based who reject God, but then the more they study, they chalk it all up to, it's a big bang, which is fine with me, but the reality and the scientific, I'm probably talking, I don't know what I'm talking about here, but the scientific study that proves the Big Bang isn't all that, it's purely theoretical, right? And it's this, to assume that all these particles and chemicals came together just out of nowhere, I think to me points to a God. I don't know, and I think that kind of plays into looking around and recognizing science and order and maybe you can't say design, but from the secular perspective, order and just looking at nature and the way things function. I think I don't know, but I was also raised in a Christian home. I think it's hard to chalk it up to chance, but again, I'm very.
Yeah, well, even science points to, like you're kind of alluding to, the Big Bang being something that must have been coordinated by something bigger. And so Stephen Hawking's, right, very well-known name in the scientific community. I was reading some writing that he put together, and he determined, along with some other astrophysicists, that 121 specific elements and occurrences had to happen simultaneously for the Big Bang to occur. And if one of those was off by 0.000, like 1301, then it could not have happened. And so even then Hawking says it's caused him to believe that it's something outside of that had to have created it. Right. Because otherwise how else do you verify that something like that could have occurred.
Yeah, being able to calculate something like that and realizing, yeah, like the chances of that being so slim is just, I don't know. I think it's got to be at least an intelligent designer.
And then another piece of nature that's really like valuable for me is the way that it makes me feel, which is just like another form of the evidence that like I was made to be in this place. Just like the way it causes me to come alive, the way that it clears my mind, the way that it gives me proper perspective, the way that it just makes my life better. You know, it's again, I'm not just like a random part of this like cosmic chance, but rather this is where I belong and this is what I've been made to be in.
Yeah. Who was I talking to about? I don't remember who it was, but we were talking about like I can't just assume that I'm just a bag of chemicals interacting with another bag of chemicals when I sit down with somebody and we're having a heart-to-heart connection. You know, like I just, and maybe that's all it is. I don't think that's the case, but it just doesn't. It doesn't seem accurate to me.
Yeah.
But no. So you were raised Christian? Is that right?
I was, yeah. When I was like 4.
Yeah.
When my dad kind of followed like God stepping into his life, and he like left a successful profession in order to go back to school, and then moved out to Rapid City when I was 7 to be a pastor. So I was more or less raised as a pastor's kid.
Okay. Yeah. And your dad was a pastor for how long?
It's from 1989 till 2016, 17. So 30, 25, 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah, he's I love your dad. He's such a funny guy. Yeah, that's cool. Being a pastor's kid, was that it can be hard for some people. Was that tough for you as a kid?
No.
Okay.
I wouldn't say so. You know, other than like being far more tied to a church building than I would have liked as a kid. You know, just the responsibilities that come along with an administrative pastor specifically. Also, everybody knew me at a church of like 500 people, but I knew nobody.
Okay.
But apart from that, I was raised in like a really good home and taught nothing but God's grace and his love. And so I didn't feel like this expectation to live a certain way that like never entered my mind, that if I didn't live up to my parents or the church standard, I wasn't going to be loved. So I think I was given like a really good foundation, even though I strayed far from it, like prodigal son style. I was still given like a solid foundation, and I'm really glad that I was.
When you strayed, we can get into that, but when you kind of strayed and stuff, was that still in the back of your mind? Like, oh, I'm still loved. Like, I'm good. Was that just a reason that you were like, it's okay if I stray?
Could have been. There's a term called licentiousness, this idea that you know that grace will save you no matter what.
Yes.
And I think that's very much how I was living. So I never did doubt God's love for me, no matter how hedonistic I became.
Sure, which on one hand is good. Is that the Corinthians that Paul talks to where he's like, should we take advantage of grace? Or something along those lines, by no means. Is that?
Yeah, could be that or Galatians.
Yeah, it's one of those. Yeah, where it's like, I think as in the individualistic culture that we're in, where we're so focused on self, even within the church, I think that's so easy to be like, well, yeah, God loves me either way, you know.
I think it's actually Romans 6, where he clearly lays out that we are saved by grace and grace alone, and then he gets into that argument. But what should we do with that?
Right.
Should we then just sin all the more? And he says, by no means.
Yeah, and I think it's so easy to do that. It's so easy to fall into, well, yeah, God loves me either way. God's gracious either way, and I think that's just so. As easy as it is for us to do, I think it's kind of disgusting.
Yeah, disgusting and foolish.
Yeah.
Both of them.
So, sorry, go ahead. So at what point did you said you kind of started to sway? How old were you?
I'd say 15, and it wasn't doubting like the existence of God. It was more just like worshiping pleasure, specifically getting high.
Okay.
I started smoking weed when I was 15, and it just grabbed a hold of me.
Yeah.
With everything that it had that I was, and just living very much for the moment, you know, even before smartphones and all of the like instant gratification became fully like in our face as a culture. that was still like playing into that part of who I was for instant gratification, the way that alcohol or drugs do for people, or sex, just like makes you feel the way that you want to feel instantly, even though it doesn't last.
So, okay, this is sort of, I'd love to hear your perspective on, like, even in South Dakota, a very conservative place, like we're kind of, I don't know the specific laws that have been put in place, but like nationwide, it seems like weed is, it's legalized in some capacities. Somewhere it's like fully okay. Other places, it's all good. Nothing's so loose. Here, if you push that little bolt, you open it a bit tighter.
It's the beauty of being a maintenance man at a cabin resort. I know how to do many of the small touches.
All good? Yeah. Sweet. And we can also put that and get some right. We should take it off too. Was like, oh yeah, what's your perspective on like legalizing marijuana and weed?
If you think about it conceptually, if I think about it conceptually, it's very similar to alcohol. And so it's very easy then to say, well, if alcohol is legal, why not legalize marijuana? Which I can see that argument. But I'm now to the point where I see both alcohol and weed as toxic. That they do not bring anything of value to a person's life. And for me personally, I can't have a glass of wine because I don't see the need to like medicate in that way, even though my parents, that's kind of what they go to, and I have full respect for them doing that. But I just see kind of the importance of keeping some restraint in place so that way certain people like myself aren't completely inundated by temptation. Right? Some people can handle it, some people can't. But just based on my own personal experience, I'm at the point where I really don't see the value or the need for people to have access to it.
Sure. But would you go but you probably wouldn't call, maybe not weed, but alcohol, would you call it a sin? Probably not.
No, I wouldn't say so. Well, it's just the way that a person approaches it. Right. And it's very easy to walk down that road and make it a sin, make it something that you rely upon more than you rely on God. Absolutely. And so it's very much just, for my own personal life, I cannot and I should not do that. And just thinking logically, it's like, why even put something that could be a stumbling block in place for people? Yeah, of course. But again, no judgment that I have towards people that go that route, but just, again, my own, like more of a philosophy that I have behind it.
Well, and I think as a pastor too, you got to tread that line so carefully, like even in my life as just a guy who sells shoes, but is a Christian and not like unashamed of that at his workplace. Like there's people that I just can't drink around because I'm like, I know that if I have one, like my drink is, or my limit is like two, like one or two. But I know that like my friends, some people that I will drink with, I'm like, you are here to get drunk. Like that's the only reason, and part of it's, some of them are, well, the people that I'm thinking of maybe are not Christian, but there are some people that just don't understand, even that are Christian, that will just go to town and it's like maybe I shouldn't drink with you. There's some things that I've set up in that way, but and some of it's like maybe I just shouldn't drink at all. Especially if ministry is down the road. For me, it's like, well, is this necessary? For me, I realized like I was super excited about it when I became 21, I was like, oh yeah, I can drink now. And it's fine. Like I enjoy beer or whatever, or whiskey with my buddies every once in a while, but I think I really don't need it, it's sort of enjoyable, but I just don't find it to be a necessity.
Yeah. And how old are you, Tabor?
23.
Yeah. Give it another 10 years, probably I'd say 20 for sure. Like when a person gets into their late 30s, into their 40s, their body can't keep up with the metabolism and like the fighting against the toxins the way that it used to. And they start to realize, like really be forced to not do those things because they see how they are like naturally toxic to the body. And so it's something that I wish I had recognized, when I was 20, 25, just how much healthier I am when I don't partake in those things.
Yeah.
And so even like throwing theology totally out the window, it's just that idea of just for the physical and the mental state, like a person is in a healthier spot if they don't like put toxins in their body.
Yeah. Well, and then there's like, and this is going down maybe too much of a rabbit trail, but then there's also the question of like just the food we eat too, like just the chemicals that are injected into our food. Like like we don't even know what we eat sometimes, just our box of whatever it is, mac and cheese or whatever it is, it's like they put so much stuff in there and makes you, and I think you could probably go on a never ending like hunt for, oh, this is unhealthy, and then eventually you're just not eating anything, So I think there's probably a balance to be had. Yeah. But it is interesting to think about how are we treating our bodies even with just the food that we consider normal.
Yeah. I know, or what we drink or what we inhale. And like the ways, fortunately I've been out of like the marijuana game before it really became legal and popular, but just everything I'm hearing from people, like the amount of THC that's now in things, it brings people to a whole different level of high. And a lot of it's like chemical based rather than like natural. Sure. And so again, just like the ways that can take control of your mind. Yeah. And then with that, God is still, if you're a Christian, God is still within you, but how much ability does he have to speak truth into your life when you are that intoxicated or you're that high? Yeah. And so then that idea of just in general, whether you're a pastor or not, if you're a follower of Jesus, if you want to be led by the Spirit, right, which is what Jesus wants to have happen. Yeah. It's like then the more sober that you are, then the more of an ability he has to like speak to you and to use you.
Right. Yeah. Like, are we limiting how often we can actually hear God's voice? I was thinking about that with fasting recently, with what we're doing at church. Like, I think sometimes I'm like, well, what's the point of this? I know the Bible says to fast, but then I was thinking specifically about like a lot of times in scripture, the apostles or whoever it was, whether it was in the Old or New Testament, people are fasting and praying while they're fasting. And oftentimes they're doing it to, maybe it's just to worship or whatever, but there's a lot of times where they're like looking for an answer for something, or they're waiting on God to reveal something to them or whatever. Like Josh and I were just studying Acts 13.
I was going to say Paul before they sent him out.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're praying and fasting, and then boom, the Holy Spirit speaks to them. And then it's like instantaneous. They're sent out, and I think for me, I had this realization, I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I was thinking about fasting. It's like when we're denying ourselves and taking those moments of like, oh man, I want whatever it is. We're fasting from alcohol, sugar, food in general. Oh, I want this. And then you take time to pray or whatever it is, be open to God speaking to you. I think we are just so much more clear, more clear-minded. And
I agree. And a big part of it is like that tangible sacrifice that you're making before God. But it also, it's amazing the way that science is catching up with the Bible. We see that endlessly, right? Whether it's like astrophysics and them understanding kind of like we were talking about with the Big Bang and like the complexities that caused it to happen. Yeah. Or when it comes to like the study of like more of the like nano focus of our bodies and the complexities of it. Or when it comes to dieting, have you looked into at all like fasting and the benefits that has on mental clarity?
I haven't looked into it, but I've heard that fasting is like needed.
Exactly. And so there's like that intermittent fasting, right? But then there's also stuff, if you do it for like 3 days, like professionals in that area have documented the amount of like whatever positive hormones that are released in your brain are at an all-time high starting about day 3 of fasting. And so just thinking about the way in which we are more open then to God and his wisdom physically, not only spiritually. And so God calling people to fast wasn't only for their sacrifice, but it was so that way their bodies could be more open to receive his wisdom.
Yeah. Which I think that the physical and the spiritual, if we look at things from a scientific perspective, I think we have such an interesting perspective now that we live in like the 21st century, as opposed to obviously living in the first century with Jesus was a privilege as well. But now that we have science that's backing up these kind of things like fasting or like the benefits of fasting or even whatever it is, dieting or whatever, I think we live in such a, it's so much more of a privilege than people realize, like the science that we have. I've heard too that with fasting, it can, I think it probably is around that 3-day, if not longer mark, but it gets rid of like your body, like expels a bunch of like dead cells and stuff if you fast for long enough or something like that. I'm probably
just the physical and the mental benefits that come alongside of it, right, that would then allow us to be more in tune with what God's doing. The fact that like the spiritual exists all around us, but it's more our lack of awareness of it, right? That inhibits us from being a part of what God wants us to do.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay, continue with where you left off. You were talking about how you kind of got into weed, and that was what?
Yeah, just kind of became my God. And so I smoked weed pretty consistently, pretty contagiously for 13 years. I would have different windows of time where I would stop for a little while, but it was just kind of one of those ones that I was for sure addicted to. People say that you don't get physically addicted to marijuana. That might be the case, like chemically, but just like that mouth-watering desire and the way that I was just not caring about my marriage or anything else. And so that way I could get high really pointed me to like that level of dependency upon it. And it wasn't until God stepped in my life in some pretty amazing ways over an extended period of time, about 9 months, that he ended up breaking that addiction like fully. So that was 2010, September of 2010. Like I walked out the other side of 21 days of prayer and fasting, not like that whole time, but I would fast for 4 days, take 3 days off, fast for 4 days, 3 days off, did that for 3 weeks. And I walked out the other side, like never to have that like mouth-watering feeling or desire ever again. And so it was like a literal like breaking of the spiritual bonds that had been put upon me back when I was 15.
Wow, that's incredible. Huh. What was I going to say about that? Nope, I lost it. I was going to ask, it was a struggle, like even after you were married? Like there was.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
While I was married, I would often choose to get high instead of like hang out sober with my wife. And she obviously didn't like that. And she would like find my roaches or little pipes hidden in certain spots. And it was just kind of, she was like, man, Evan, you can't keep doing this. And I would just continue to do it. And we happened to be living in Hawaii at the time. And I was kind of scrounging around outside on what they call a lanai, like the back patio, looking for like any pieces of weed that I had ashed out. And I heard God just tell me, Evan, you can't do this. To which I replied, like, all right, prove yourself to me. I want somebody that I don't know to speak to me. Just kind of this cocky sort of, I know you're real, but I don't care about you. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in church. My wife didn't come that week. She had something else going on. And after the service, a woman who was sitting like one seat next to me looked at me and said, I don't know you, but I feel like I'm supposed to tell you to plant your feet. And it's just, even now, I'm feeling the tingles. It like hit me like a ton of bricks of God saying, you know what's true. You just have to like live out of it now. Like you have to dig in and trust me. And so that started like a 4-month process of me like committing more to God, going to a small group and like really battling. And then it kind of came to the apex with that 21 days of prayer and fasting. And I walked out the other side, like into the light, like the darkness, like so much of it like left behind.
The 21 days of fasting, is that why we do it downtown? Because that's crazy.
It changed my life. And so it's like, now I'm in a position to help other people encounter it as well. And so it's like, why wouldn't I like orchestrate a time in which we as a church come together to seek God for 21 days?
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be 21 days, but there's so much science, like neurological science behind the power of 21 days of repeated effort, like within the brain.
That's incredible. I'm so glad I know the story behind why we do that. Because I didn't really think about it, to be honest. I just figured 3 weeks. Like you said, it's pattern building.
No, that's something that I really don't share with people. Maybe I should more, but it's just kind of like, I don't want it to be about me and my experience. And so it's just like a chance for people to like intentionally seek God on their own for their own reasons. I don't want to have any sort of hope, I guess, that people think that they're going to walk out of this with some sort of miracle in their life as well,
Sure, right. Because it could just be something that builds habits. And that's what I'm hoping for me. Like, me and Becca, we've been reading our Bible every day. And for me, like, it's been super transformative. And I mean, like, I'd like to say before, I tried to read my Bible every day, but actually being like, nope, this is something I've committed to. And it's been huge. Like, it's been really cool.
And you've been doing it with your wife too?
Yep. Yeah, we've both been doing it. Yep. It's been great. Like last night we both didn't get home until it was almost 9. We were together and eating dinner or whatever. And I was like, I didn't read my Bible today. I don't think you did either. Like, so at like 9:30, we're sitting here like highlighting and stuff. And it's been super cool. It's been super cool to watch her, do that too. It's one of the most, this is silly, but as a Christian man, it's one of the most attractive things when you get to watch your wife studying her Bible. And I've told her that. It's funny. But what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, that woman. Did you ever get to know her at all or anything?
A little bit, not much. She Yeah, she was really like enthralled with the idea of prayer, and she was a part of that prayer ministry. But it seemed like it was more just for that moment that she was supposed to say that one 3 word phrase for me.
Yeah. That's crazy. That is so crazy. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
That's cool. So then, okay, so at that moment, you were like, whoa, okay, God, you answered my prayers. And that you said like it was 9 months-ish of you like, was that rehab or was
So that was kind of like the climax of like 9 months in which God was really seeking me out, and just kind of in different ways, and just kind of brought me to that place of total surrender through that time of like focusing in on him for those 21 days, and then like that spiritual liberation that he gave me, even physical liberation that he gave me afterwards, and then walking out the other side just kind of like, man, all right, God for sure is real, and he like has plans for me. I want to get to know him more. That was like the biggest part of it. It was just like, all right, God, I grew up like reading about you, I knew of you, but now I want to experience you. And so we were on the big island of Hawaii where YWAM's main campus is at, like the University of Nations. And so I would go like every Tuesday night to something they had called Prayer and Fragrance. And it was a time where it was just all about worship. They had worship sets, and that was open to the public. And I would just fall down on my knees in the corner of this dark room and be overwhelmed by worshiping God. And it was such an emotional time for me. You know, we had one of those at Rimrock just on Sunday, and I was just thinking about like, I wonder why that was such like an emotionally wrecking time for me. But I just wonder what God was doing like within me, mentally and emotionally, like transforming me during that time.
yeah.
Because he had kind of opened the door by freeing me from my addiction to weed, and then it gave him a lot more opportunity to like really start working deeper within me. And so I was willing to just commit so much time to him after that. I volunteered with a youth group and led that for a year with that church, and just like, all right, God, how do you want to use me? And then that ended up moving into me, like moving away from Hawaii and studying the Bible in North Carolina for 10 months through another YWAM program of just like, all right, I feel like God, another crazy story, but I feel like God's called me to do this. And so we just took that next step of obedience just to be open to whatever God wanted. And then talk about like a fully transformative 10 months. If you do nothing but read the Bible in the mountains, right, with other people, and it was inductively, so we weren't learning theology, but we were just going to the Bible itself to see what it said. And that was like a 180 for me with my understanding of God, my understanding of life, my understanding of myself. Yeah. So I understand what you're saying about the power of the Bible.
Yeah.
And my wife had done one of those courses 10 years earlier. And so just how beautiful it is to see your wife like as wise as she is when it comes to the Bible.
Yeah.
You normally don't hear people saying that like Bible nerds are sexy, but it's like one of the sexiest things for me with my wife.
Yeah. No, for sure. For sure. Yeah. Just, watching spiritual growth it's so cool. Mm-hmm. It is, yeah, it's super attractive. Were you in Hawaii for YWAM originally?
We had gone there for a month to be what they call mission builders, and it's basically like volunteer that like my wife cooked meals and I was like a maintenance man, and people do that to help support the base, but we came there in order to have a free place to stay while we found places to live in Hawaii. So we were just using the base. But within like 2 or 3 days, like being in that place, like God grabbed a hold of me initially. That was like the beginning of that 9-month transformation, where it was just like I started feeling God in like such different ways. And part of it, like the style of approach or worship in YWAM was far different than like Rimrock that I grew up in, much more intellectual and a bit stoic, where that was much more experiential, right? Even Pentecostal and just like, and so that was like a really beautiful insight that I had of different ways in which people can worship God that really engaged more of my emotions than just my brain.
And the charismatic side of Christianity, I think, is spooky to a lot of us. Yeah. But it can be so powerful in such a good way. It can be a negative thing for sure, like if you go too far into some of that. But if you get into unbiblical territory. But like there were some crazy moments that I had when I was youth group. And I'm super involved at a charismatic church in town here. And looking back on some of that experience, there were some things that I disagreed with, but there were some really, really cool moments that I had where I had people like prophesy over me, and it's crazy. Like some of those things are just so cool. Some of the ways that people are just bold in those circles, and like this is what's going to happen. Or even if it's not like prophecy, it'll be like this is what I think your giftings are. It's just super cool. And I think and then in the more reformed or whatever you want to call it side of the faith, there's not enough of that. But there probably is more biblical literacy, And so I think I'm hoping, and it's probably, I don't know if this will happen or not, but I'm hoping that at some point in the near future of the church, we can have some kind of church where we come together and recognize the importance of both. It's just so important. There is kind of, it seems like, at least like on the social media side of things, there is some kind of, I don't even know what you want to call it. It's not a denomination. It's like this movement of like these kind of younger pastors, probably in their, I don't know, 30s and stuff, that have come up and been like, hey, like I'm a Calvinist, but I'm also cool with like, speaking in tongues at your worship service, or whatever. And it's like this weird, I don't know, about like combination of the two sides of the faith,
Yeah, I would say that's a biblical model.
Yeah.
That's personally how I see it. Because I agree, there's a spectrum between charismatic and reformed. And honestly, there's value in both. So my desire is to be a part of a community that's somewhere in the middle, that is open to both, but not drawn like too extensively to one or the other.
Which is great. That's so great. Yeah. Where did you, in YWAM, and the reason I ask this is because I have friends who have had interesting experiences with YWAM. Did you have any negative experiences?
I did not.
Really?
No, I've met many people that have. And part of the problem with YWAM, and there's such value potentially behind it, but they are willing to equip almost anyone to lead almost anything.
Sure.
And so it's just this idea of like, if you want to be a part of this and you have a vision, let us help you carry that out. And they're often, like, part of the problem is that they become really large. They had like 500 campuses around the world. That was like pre-COVID, so I don't know where it's at now.
Sure.
But they're just like growing so quickly. It's like the largest school, I don't even know what you would call it, maybe largest nonprofit organization in the world. But it's because they're putting people so quickly into forms of leadership before they should really be there. And so when you have somebody that's leading 6 months after they joined the school as an 18-year-old, like, you imagine the issues that are going to come from their leadership with the students underneath them.
Yeah, and maybe in some of those cases, you've got people who 6 months after they've joined, but maybe 6 months before that they were just saved, and I have no idea. I was never
I've met plenty of people like that. Sure. Or their parents like tricked them to coming to YWAM. They didn't even know what it was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And certainly God can use those situations, like, obviously in those negative things that happen, like God is faithful, and
but there's so many good stories that have come out of YWAM, lives truly transformed by YWAM. Right. So it shouldn't be ruled out altogether, but obviously it should be looked into somewhat carefully before you join a certain branch of YWAM.
Yeah, for sure. Well, even like for me, like I said, I've never done YWAM, but when I went off to college all by myself, like all hyped up about my faith and stuff, like getting to GCU, the Christian community at GCU is awesome. Like, it's really great. But you get there, and like the first week you have in campus is called Welcome Week. And there's no classes, you just move in. And so you get moved in, and it's like everybody's in the same boat, freshmen. Anyway, we're all in the same boat. None of us know each other. So like you go to these like worship nights that we have on some of them were multiple times a week. And it's like this crazy, great, like spiritually like concentrated experience where we're all together, we're all praising God, whatever. And it's this great thing. But you get people like myself who just get so excited and want to have a message for everyone in the crowd and stuff. And it was just like, I look back on some of the things that even I felt like the Spirit was prompting me to say, and I'm like, probably not. I think I was just excited, and not to say that God didn't use those things, but like, or you get, people walking up and saying crazy things. And
did they have the line like, "I have a word"?
Some people did. Yeah,
I got that so many times with my time with YWAM. That was like the coin phrase. Like somebody had something from God. They say, "I have a word for you."
Yeah, or you probably didn't get this because you were married, but God told me to marry you or whatever. Those kind of things. Jordy Book have told me lots of stories about that. Like, yeah, that it's just, yeah. So
And I like how you're phrasing it. I maybe was just a little bit too excited.
yeah, yeah.
Which doesn't mean it wasn't fun and a good
Of
thing to be a
course.
part of, but how confidently people like you and I speak God's word.
Yeah, yeah.
How long were you in Hawaii for?
I went there as a sophomore in college and then back after I'd gotten married, so 3 years total.
Okay.
And then spent a year in North Carolina.
Yes.
Near the end of that year, my wife got pregnant, not by our planning, and so we decided to come back to the Black Hills just in order to like have a kid and then most likely move back to Hawaii.
Okay.
But during that year, God kind of, through Raz's parents, God gave us the opportunity to buy those cabins. And just through a lot of prayer, we felt like it was the best way to go.
Yeah.
And so we've been around Rapid now for 12 years, just based on my wife getting knocked up. And
Yeah.
otherwise, we would have most likely been in Hawaii. But it's been I'm so glad that God led us to remain around here, just all the value that's come out of it.
Yeah, you guys love it here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't realize this, but you've been around here around the time that I have, just a little bit longer, a couple of years more. Because I think next year in June or July, it'll be 11 years, I think, for my family.
Yeah.
And then obviously that's including the time that I was at GCU, but I still called here home. So,
Sure.
but yeah, okay, that's interesting. And you guys are gonna stick around here for.
Seems like it. Yeah. Who knows where God will call us? You know, with our kids being in 3rd and 6th grade, and being at good schools and having the community that they have, you know, we won't, even though we have gypsy blood, I don't think we'll be transient for a little while longer.
Sure. That's cool. Okay, so then where does what comes next, I guess? Because I wanna get to your climbing accident, but I don't know when that happens in the timeline.
Yeah, so moved back here, in 2012. We're running that business, and during that time, like the business that we own is seasonal, and so you work really hard from April until the end of October, and you can make enough money if you work hard enough and you live practically enough that we would then have 5 months off every winter to do what we wanted.
So did you work at all during those 5 months, or that's cool?
I was a middle school and high school teacher, and then we tried to do both, run the cabins and do that, and realized I can't, and so ended up feeling called by God to become a full-time toilet scrubber and maintenance man instead of pouring into like 14 and 15-year-olds. It was definitely a hard pill to swallow, but seeing the other side of it, it's such value to it. But within that 5 months, like the first 2 years, we would just travel around to different YWAM bases, and I would teach. There's the program that I was a part of in North Carolina was called School of Biblical Studies, and so I would just go to any of these, like in Colorado Springs or in Hawaii or North Carolina, Tennessee, and just like teach, lecture on one or more of the books of the Bible that they happen to be studying through. And so we could just, my wife and I and our 2 kids, as they kind of came into our lives, would just travel around to these different bases and just hang out and love on people in that way.
That's cool.
And then just kind of to get to my climbing accident, I felt like I was supposed to stick around the 3rd winter that we were running the cabins in order to pour into Rimrock downtown. Steve Balsley, who was the head pastor of Rimrock at that time, he had stage 4 esophageal cancer, and he didn't really have the energy to pour into like a second campus, and so he kind of brought me in as kind of like a quasi pastor, nothing formal. And so we decided to stick around for that, but still wanted to go down to Colorado Springs and teach at one of those YWAM schools. And so we went down there in April, about 8 years ago, and taught one day. I was teaching through Kings and Chronicles, and then the next morning on Tuesday, I guess afternoon, I met one of the staff members there to take him out climbing at a place called Red Rock Open Space. It's right outside of Colorado Springs on your way to Monument. And it during that time, I took him out climbing, and I led up, and then I was being lowered down. And kind of looking on the app that we had, it said it was a 60-foot, 70-foot climb, which is like 200 or 210, 220 feet. And my rope is only 60 meters.
Okay.
And so I didn't do the things that I should have done, such as tying what they call like a belayer's knot.
Yes. Yeah.
So that way, as the belayer is belaying, the rope cannot slip through the device, even if you run out. And it was like the first time he had ever been out climbing. And so he was looking up at me, lowering me, doing the right thing. And then, 30 to 40 feet from the ground, my rope came out of his device. And so no longer held me up. And so I just dropped.
Oh my gosh. And how many feet you said?
Like 30 to 40. Down kind of not a fully vertical, maybe like an 80-degree rocky slope, and then crashed into the bottom, smack in the back of my skull.
Sure.
Required 17 staples, like in my skull itself.
Sure.
Busted my elbow, my vertebrae on my back were pretty messed up, collarbone, just a decent amount of physical stuff. But the main issue was my brain ricocheting inside of my skull. And so when he kind of fortunately caught me some way, and so that probably saved my life. But when my back of my head hit the rock, it caused my brain to ricochet the opposite direction and smash against the front of my skull. And so it brought in like a ton of damage to my frontal cortex, right, which is like what makes us human. Right. And then my temporal lobe, which really helps with our memory as well as other things. So a decent amount, I currently have a decent amount of scar tissue in those two spots.
Wow. So when you fell, do you remember like anything?
I remember like a quarter of a second of the,
Yeah.
just kind of like something.
Yeah.
And then my next like really concurrent memory that like it's more lasting than just something fleeting was 9 days later. I woke up.
Really?
My memory came back in the hospital, yeah.
So when you smacked your skull, were you out right away?
Apparently, no.
Okay, you were kind
I
of.
was just kind of, and like a lot stronger than him and like pushing him off, but like just garbling along, mumbling, not really making any sense. He had to try to hold me down. Some other climbers came there and they were able to bring the paramedics in pretty quickly.
Sure. Was it just you and him out climbing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So 9 days later. So were you awake in the hospital? I mean, I'm assuming you were sleeping a lot, but like, were you kind of off and on?
Yeah, I was in a drug-induced coma for the first, I'd say 36 hours, I believe, is kind of what I've been told. And the main reason they wanted to keep me in a drug-induced coma was just to like slow down my mental processing. So that way, hopefully my brain wouldn't swell too quickly. Because apparently when you take major shots to the head like that, your brain will swell. And often they have to take off your skull in order to allow the brain to expand and then come back down. Otherwise, it'll compress and obviously bad things would happen.
Oh my gosh.
And so I was in a drug-induced coma for those 36 hours, and they would take me on and off just to see how I was doing. And they finally decided at that 36-hour mark, all right, let's just see how it goes. And if we need to cut off his skull, right, they had my wife kind of sign a waiver allowing them to do that. But then, like, once they brought me out of my drug-induced coma, the neurologist said 2 different times to my wife that this is miraculous.
Wow.
Prior to that, they're telling her, like, at best, right, he may be able to communicate with you, but most likely he'll be like a vegetable. Most likely he won't be able to walk. Most likely you'll have to be taking care of him fully, right? Everything that we've seen documented throughout, like, past experiences, this is what seems to be happening. Yeah. So imagine being my family hearing that. Yeah. But then my wife just told me this recently, like, at not one point in any of her conversations with the neurologist was there any hint that he was like a believer. There was nothing at all. Yeah. But then 2 different times she told him that this was miraculous. He told her that this was miraculous. And so it wasn't just like this believer speaking out, but rather just like, I can't explain why it is going the way that it was going.
Holy cow.
And so within 7 days, I was released out of ICU. Which with my injury shouldn't have happened. And then within 9 days, and this is when my memory started coming back, I was brought into a brain rehab hospital up in Denver, where I spent approximately 3 weeks, just kind of in more recovery up there.
Sure. That is, wow. I can imagine being your wife. Holy cow.
And so honestly, for me, it really, and if we want to get into it, it's been a wild and hard journey the last 8 years. And so just because I can speak, just because I wasn't a vegetable doesn't mean that my brain was in the spot that it used to be. But the actual accident and all of that stuff was far more traumatic for my family than it was for me.
Sure.
Because I obviously don't remember it, and just being on the inside, being fully affected by it, like I've been very desensitized to it all. But to have like your best friend or your son kind of change the way that I have changed and to go through what I've gone through, it's been much harder for like my family than it was for me who actually went through it.
Yeah, I can imagine. Wow. Yeah, I don't even like. I couldn't imagine watching my spouse like hit the ground and then just like not be able to properly communicate for.
And she wasn't even there. So
Right, sure,
she got a call like saying, "Hey, your husband fell. He most likely will die. Come to the hospital."
Oh wow.
So a whole nother form of like being informed.
Yeah, that's crazy. Huh. So then, okay, so you said you were in Colorado for 3 weeks?
Yeah, Denver. Yep.
Denver. Okay, yeah, yeah. And what was that like?
It was all right. Just kind of zipped up in like a cocoon every night, so I couldn't break free. Kind of strapped down into my bed because they didn't want me to move, and then I just go through various therapies each day to kind of help me.
Like, was it like speaking, like speech
Yeah,
therapy?
so speech therapy, occupational therapy, like physical therapy. I think those are the three big ones.
Did you have? I'm assuming you had a pretty intense, like mental, like not like emotional health issues. Did you at all?
So the best way to like, if possible, to kind of describe like what I had to deal with like post brain injury, it's like if you see your energy level as a gas tank, I would start most days at like a 16th of a tank back then.
Oh, okay.
And then once like you're exhausted, so think about how you feel. Let's say for you, like what, midnight is when you're tired.
Yeah. Yeah.
For people that are like my age, when it's like 7:30 p.m., right, you're tired. And then just the way that your brain and your emotions are affected by your tiredness,
Yeah.
like I would be like that, like so much quicker by like 9 a.m., even though I had slept 12 hours the night before because my body needed it. And so I would just get much more reactionary just based on my personality, be far too confident, pointing out the wrongs of other people, even though I was just having no clue what I was even saying. And my memory, it's still a struggle for me when my energy level dips low enough. But that was another major piece of it, was just not being able to remember things the way that I would like to.
Sure. So you said memory is still kind of an issue for you?
Yeah.
I mean, at least in our relationship, I've never noticed that.
It's gotten a lot better.
That's good. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And so, yeah, the last 8 years have been just a wild journey for sure. But, you know, I think year 4 or 5, I started to realize that it was a really good thing for me to go through, to the point now where I see my brain injury as a gift from God. And I wouldn't not do it if I had the option, because of the ways that he has transformed me through such a hard event.
Sure.
You know, it's forced me, if nothing else, to be fully dependent on him.
Right.
When you're unable, like a person like me that loves to interact, loves to teach, when you're unable to like speak with somebody for more than a half an hour before you crash, and then you can't talk to them for another week, I can't talk to anybody for another week, it could easily have put me into a place of despondency where it's like, what's the point of my life? But like one of the foundational truths I learned from this, I'm still alive only because God wants me to be alive.
Yeah.
Like when you go through something like that, it's like undeniable, one, that there is a God, like the neurologist was saying, that's miraculous, something outside of what we can explain. And 2, he must have kept me around for a reason.
Right.
And so even though I could do so little for so long, it was just like, all right, God, I just need to trust you because you still have me here when you didn't have to keep me here, but you still have me here for a reason.
Yeah. Wow.
And so being forced to do that was like such a profound level of transformation that I wouldn't ever want to get rid of.
Sure.
You know, if you talk to anybody who has been through like a near life experience, I don't know if you've heard that phrase before.
Sure. Yeah.
It's just like, there's no denying that you're today is a gift, that you are here for a reason, right? Be grateful for this moment. And I don't know if that's something that you can really transpose upon somebody who hasn't gone through that.
Yeah. That is an incredible perspective that you can just be like, yeah, I'm glad it happened. I don't think most people would feel that way. Maybe. Yeah, well, no, I really don't. Especially, I mean, like, because, like, I mean, the fact that you can look back at that and realize the good that it has caused you, which obviously, like, objectively it has, but it's like in that moment, I mean, you're probably not thinking like you are right now. Back then there's no way, I'm sure.
That's the beauty of God's like continual presence in a person's life, right? His patience, right? The fact that he's always pouring grace upon us until we finally get that hindsight perspective where we can look back. Because if you would have asked me year 1, 2, 3, 4, even 4, I wasn't all that sure. There's no way I would have said that. I'd have been like, no, take this away from me.
Yeah.
But now, that like such well-known verse in Romans 8:28, all things work together for good, right?
Yeah.
Paul's not just talking about like the good things in our lives, but it's just showing me that this is just one of those pieces that, and it's probably the most, like the largest catalyst for transformation in my life.
Yeah. Dang. That's so cool. And the way that sanctified you, and in the moments where you probably didn't realize it, like God transforming you through that, being like, I think what really is powerful to me from that is your true realization of like, I don't have anything else to rely on aside from God. I think we all say that. Mm-hmm. I think we all kind of accept that as, and by we, I mean Christians, but to actually be in a spot where you really can't trust in anything else. Like, yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
I know. And there's a lot of different examples of what that could look like. Yeah. It's not only internally, like when your spouse or your kid is going through really hard times, right? There's just, if we want to see ourselves in those positions, right? If we're actually looking for those, I think you'll notice it more often than you think. Like the chance to like truly depend upon God, whether it's financially, whether it's with your like career, if your marriage is falling apart, right? There's just like, they're smaller than like a major shot to the head where you should have died. But I still think if you're looking for ways in which you can and should trust in God, they're definitely there.
Yeah. And that circles back to our kind of open the conversation with like awareness. Like, are we aware? And that's like, again, something that Josh and I talked about today. Like, I think we just forget that God is, we remember that God is always there as Christians. Again, it's something that we accept, but I think we just aren't looking for him that often. And what does it take for you to be aware, like it could, I think for a lot of us, it should be fasting, or it could be denying something in our life. Like, like, does alcohol bring me closer to God? Probably not. Maybe it does for some. I doubt it, but for some weird reason, for some people, maybe like in group settings or whatever. But what makes us more aware?
And what you're describing, regardless of what it is, but just like intentionally pursuing God. Because the more that we seek him out, then the more we will see the ways that he is already trying to like introduce himself to us and interact with us. Yeah. But it's just where our eyes are set, where our hearts are set, seem to be why we see him or we do not see him.
Mm. Yeah.
One thing that kind of really brought me to that point of like utter reliance on God, in year 4 or 5 after my injury, my brain was getting better. It definitely wasn't where it is now or where I wanted it to be. But I started having something they call partial seizures.
Okay.
And so it was due most likely to the scar tissue that obviously still exists in my brain. And it would almost like the electrons, the neurons would misfire. And based on which part of the brain the synapses are like miswired, it kind of affects or changes the like style of seizure. And for me, it would be just kind of these like really like somewhat morbid, but very real deja vus that I had no idea where they were coming from, would just hit me out of nowhere. And then for like 30 seconds, I was on a roller coaster internally where my stomach would just drop out and I would just have all these adrenaline rushes. And then for a good 10 minutes after that, it was really hard for me to like think clearly, let alone even speak. And these were coming like once, like 2 or 3 times within like a 10 to 13 day period. And they would come out of nowhere, and they would fully dismantle me. And so 4 different times while I was teaching in front of like 100 people at church, I went through one of those. Did you happen to be there for any of those?
No, I just remember you talking about it.
And so just like, again, kind of go through that 2 minutes of just like otherworldly experience, like surreal, and then being unable to even speak while I have a microphone and so many people looking at me in like mid-sentence.
Sure.
And so kind of, I remember after the first one, just being like, man, should I keep doing this? Should I really keep doing this? And different people from our community said, yeah, we're here to support you. You should keep doing it. And so just kind of me timing out, all right, I had a seizure 3 days ago, but I only had one. It's a Saturday night. I wonder if Sunday morning, right? And it was just like always bring me back to like, all right, God, I have literally nothing that I can bring to this church through my teaching. And so if you want me to have it, fine. If you don't, fine, but your will be done.
Right.
And so as my brain was kind of starting to rebuild itself and my confidence was like returning to where it used to be, where I was much more confident in myself and cared much more about what other people thought of me, God brought in like, hey, Evan, don't forget how much you need to depend on me. And so having that happen 4 times in a matter of a year was so humbling.
I'm sure.
But it was also amazing to see the way in which our community would respond. You know, they would just come up because I was so confident to the point of being belligerent. They would just come up and like grab the microphone out of my hand.
Wow.
And just like come alongside me and then pray. And people would just wait like 5 minutes and then I would keep going.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask is how did that happen?
Yeah.
Wow. That's
And
crazy.
so to be able to be a part of a community that's that supportive and humble, right? To just allow like their main speaker to like have that sort of pitfall.
That's crazy. Yeah. So, okay. So you would have these mini, you said partial seizures,
Partial, yeah.
So how did, like, does it start, like, you know it right away?
I know it like a half second before it's all coming.
And it comes with this deja vu, you said.
Yeah.
Can you kind of describe what that, like, I mean, I know what deja vu is, but like to the best.
So it's like deja vu, but like from a movie. Like, man, am I living in some sort of, am I outside of my body? Like looking back on something, it's like that real, almost like apparent. Like I can almost see it in front of me.
Interesting. So you see that and then.
And then a roller coaster ride with different sort of adrenaline rushes, like bottom drops out.
And does that take place over just a few seconds? Or you said the whole thing's like 5 minutes, you said?
Yeah, I'd say a minute or 2.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, which is nice. So the different partial seizures roll out in different ways. So some people, they'll just basically pass out, stop talking, eyes closed, eyes open, and they're just like lights out for like 2 minutes. So you'll be in mid-conversation and they'll stop and they'll just be staring at you but saying nothing.
Which is kind of freaky.
Absolutely. Right. And obviously epileptic where your whole body's shaking, different things like that. And so I'm quite grateful of the type of seizures that I get to experience. It's more fun than it could be.
Yeah. Yeah. So how long has it been since you've had one of these?
So my wife, she's an amazing in so many ways, but so supportive. She did a bunch of research on partial seizures and discovered like how important a person's diet is to the seizures. And so I got into the keto diet like 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. And because of that, it took a while for the effects to kick in. I have seizures, like a group of seizures every like 3 or 4 months, where they used to be like every week. And so there's been spans where it's been almost a year without having seizures.
Wow. That's cool.
So it's in a far more sustainable or manageable place than it used to be.
And how long has it been since you've been doing the keto thing?
I bet you it could be 4 years, 3.5, 4 years.
Sure. That's cool. And so all you do is protein and fat, right? Is that it? Yeah. Pretty much?
I'm not quite that strict,
Yeah.
but that's like the main part of my diet.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, this is like a whole nother point of just the awareness of your body. But when I feel my brain starting to go places that I don't want it to go, not seizure-esque, but just fading, I've just found the need for me to bring in fuel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the main thing with keto, I guess the main thing with my diet is avoiding empty carbs.
What does that mean? Empty carbs.
And so there are like valuable carbs. And so you don't want to, it's good to not rule out carbs altogether. You know, I found for me, it's easier just to not have carbs,
Sure.
but that's just because of more of my condition, the condition of my brain. But for sure, just like, empty carbs is kind of the best, like holistic way, universal way to describe it. But it causes your body and your blood sugar and all those things to like peak like instantly with energy and different things like that. And then in a matter of 10 to 15 minutes, as your body processes it, right, everything goes away and you just then crash out. And so it's the need for me to go to things that the type of fuel that is much more sustainable. Right? And so when you get into like ketosis, and it can take a little while to get there, but cutting out carbs, cutting out sugar, that's another really bad one. Alcohol is another part of that. When you cut those out and you focus in just more on the proteins and the fats, those are something that will feed your body for hours on end instead of just for 10 to 15 minutes. And so it's something called like a slow burn that your body is just continually eating away at, that allows you to have much more of a stable mindset, stable level of energy, mental clarity comes with those things.
That's cool. So you don't really do carbs at all, or you do some like good carbs?
A little bit.
Okay.
Not much though. So when basically where I'm at with it, like I'll eat nuts and things like that, or I basically just eat a ton of vegetables and a ton of meat and cheese. Like I'll go through like a laughing cow wheel of cheese in a day, maybe a day and a half.
That's awesome.
And so at first your body has to adjust to it digestively, but after you adjust and you get on certain supplements, it's not really that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I go, like I'm really into mountain biking, and so I'll still have like energy bars during that time, but as long as my body is like processing as quick as it does during a bike ride, then it doesn't bring any sort of effects on me mentally at all.
Dang, that's cool. Yeah, I've heard. I think we talked a little bit about this before. Like the trend of is it the barbarian diet, or what is it called? It's just steak is what you eat, like protein or beef.
Yeah.
What you eat.
Carnivore.
Carnivore. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. Which is like which.
So I'm not quite that far.
Right. Yeah.
But like paleo or keto or any of those ones where you're just like cutting out, like there's just those empty calories.
Yeah.
Right. Those like extremely, I can't quite think of the adjective that people would probably know that comes before the carbs, but it's just like they're bleached. They have like no nutrients whatsoever. Yeah. And then if you get into like the chemicals that are in food, it's like that much worse. Yeah. And so that's like, I mentioned like one of the major things in which I learned from my brain injury was relying on God. But the other one is being aware of how I feel.
Sure.
Because like with the energy level I had and the state of my brain, I had very little margin. And so a normal person has the ability to do things that aren't like super healthy because their body has that margin that allows them to like keep moving, even though they're not getting what they absolutely need. But for me, like I had very little to no margin at all. And so with diet, with like what I would do, specifically like visual stimuli would drain me. And so I went to a movie within the first year or so with my son, and I could do nothing like 3 days afterwards.
Really?
And so driving was a big one for me. I had to turn my phone to like black and white, just like having to really pay attention. Like, all right, Evan, how do you feel after you do this? And when I started to do that, diet was like such a crucial piece of that.
Sure.
As well as activity, as well as the things that I do within my life. That allowed me, even now that I have a lot more margin, to figure out the best ways to like feed into me so that way I can live the best life I want to live. Yeah. And so just like a simple equation, right? If you want to live the best life you want to live, you need to pay attention to how you feel after you eat, after you do whatever, and then respond accordingly, right? Positively to continue to do what you need to do and to cut out what you should not be doing.
Right. Dang. Yeah, and that's just, it is so simple, but I think we just all get in our rhythms. And we just fuel however we feel like we need to fuel. You know, like I got home and just ate like a bunch of Pringles just because I needed to. You know, it was in the pantry. You know, but it's like, responding to those things. That's.
And so there's been a big movement towards this in the last decade, like with Whole30 and different things like that.
Okay. Yeah.
And so even though that's not like Christian based. I still think there's a lot of biblical principles of like God created us to operate in a certain way. And so we just need to pay attention to how we feel, to seek him and his truth, right? Speak to the Spirit as if he's real, and just like seek guidance, also seek guidance from other people. Because it's like, if you're willing to put the time into it and then like live it out, like your life will be 100 times better than it may be right now. And so it's worth the time. It's worth the effort because of what it'll give you.